In early 1862, Jefferson Davis, the Provisional Confederate President, was inaugurated for a full 6-year term, and the unicameral Provisional Confederate Congress gave way to the first regular Confederate Congress, which now included a Senate. Historian William C. Davis writes that the new Congress convened amidst a series of setbacks on the battlefield, from the fall of Fort Henry on the Tennessee River in early February to the fall of New Orleans on April 25th. Now everything seems stained, from Congress's point of view. Texas member Peter W. Gray noticed what Vice President Alexander Stephens and others would comment upon in later days, that the caliber of the members had declined somewhat from that of the Provisional Congress. It had been composed of the best and most patriotic, and many of them had chosen to enlist or raise regiments rather than continue to sit in a legislature, leaving their seats to be filled in too many cases by lesser men. One of the new senators was William Lowndes Yancey, the Alabama fire eater, who had recently wrapped up an unlikely period of service as a diplomat struggling against overwhelming odds to win European recognition and aid for the new country he had helped bring into being. Unable to leave London until February, he did not reach Richmond, Virginia, the new Confederate capital, until March 28th, less than a month before the first session ended. He was appearing in a National Assembly for the first time since resigning from the U.S. Congress 16 years before. Would he prove to be one of the best and most patriotic, or one of the lesser men? Yancey's first major vote came April 16th when he joined majorities in both houses in granting President Davis's request for the first military draft on the North American continent, mandating a 3-year term of service for all able-bodied white men aged 18 to 35 and requiring 1-year volunteers already in uniform to remain active another 2 years. As historian Emory M. Thomas notes, this was a significant step toward improving Confederate military strength and away from the traditions of state rights and individualism characteristic of the antebellum South. And Congress did not make the draft more palatable when, in October 1862, in the name of exemption reform, it exempted owners or overseers of 20 or more slaves. This species of class exemption stimulated class conflict. Southern yeomen resented so blatant a symbol of the rich man's war as poor man's fight. Conscription, more than any other issue, exposed latent conflict between state and national government in the South. This was quite a concession for someone like Yancey, whose name was as synonymous with states' rights as anyone alive in 1862. And his personal transformation was mirrored by that of the South at large, now that it was a nation fighting to preserve its independence, which for many Southerners became the most important end unto itself, rather than a means to pursue other ends. Again citing Thomas, this time in another book, however much the Confederates wanted to alter their political doctrine, or however much they were forced to do so by circumstances, the alteration occurred. It occurred within a nation supposedly fighting to defend the doctrine of state rights, and thus the political transformation was part of the internal revolution in the wartime South. Goaded by the demands of a modern, total war, the Confederate government abandoned the political system it was called into being to defend. The Confederacy raised a national army, conscripted troops, employed martial rule, managed the economy, and even interfered with Southern stills. The state and local governments expanded their powers in like measure. And all the while, the bodies of Jefferson and Calhoun whirled in their graves. The realities of wartime did not cause Yancey to abandon completely his state rights ideals. Despite having voted for conscription, he often warned against the creeping expansion of central government powers and of military authority over civil life. He saw moves by Davis and his congressional supporters to create a Confederate Supreme Court as a threat to state sovereignty. Yancey biographer Eric H. Walther lays out Yancey's reasoning. The separate sovereign states created the court. It therefore could not possess the power to declare constitutional something that any or all of the states considered unconstitutional. He warned the Senate, when you strain the powers of the central government against the states, you will have a war of intellect, which will soon become a moral war, and the flashing of judgments will soon become a flashing of swords. Although Yancey's diplomatic tenure had done much to cool his fiery temper, it flashed again during debates over the Supreme Court when things got personal between himself and Senator Benjamin Hill of Georgia. When Yancey was called upon to apologize on February 4, 1863, Walther writes in his book The Fire Eaters that, although Yancey vehemently denied uttering anything offensive, he said he wished he had done so. "You had better then do so now," Hill cried. Yancey stated calmly that he had already said everything a gentleman could say, and he started to sit down when I was shocked by a blow of great severity upon my cheekbone, just below the outer corner of my right eye and the temple, which immediately flooded my collar, neck, and bosom with blood. The culprit was a glass inkstand, which Hill had hurled at Yancey, who rose to attack Hill, only to have Hill throw a second inkstand, this time missing. Their colleagues broke up the row, and Walther writes, although no one recorded what Yancey had said in the secret session to provoke Hill, the Confederate Senate censured Yancey and not Hill for the incident. The facial wound Yancey received in February healed quickly, but his chronic medical problems worsened by summer. Afflicted with fever and a serious kidney ailment, Yancey remained in bed from July 2nd until his death on July 27, 1863. Yancey, who had constantly battled health problems, died a couple weeks shy of his 49th birthday. He at least had the consolation of dying a citizen of the Confederacy, but he had lived long enough to get news of the fall of Vicksburg, which he blamed on Jefferson Davis. Yancey and the president had squabbled over a patronage appointment and a few similarly petty misunderstandings, but had begun to patch things up when Yancey died. William C. Davis writes that, in his will, Yancey left Davis a telescope that once belonged to George Washington, perhaps a sign that all was forgiven, though Yancey's wife actually blamed Davis for the illness that killed her husband. Sadly, the glass did nothing to improve Davis's vision of how to deal with men as autocratic and independent as himself. Yancey was widely eulogized throughout the Confederacy, with the Montgomery Advertiser saying Yancey was to the politics of the country what Stonewall Jackson was to the field. In the long run, his legacy largely faded, although in 1966 the notorious Alabama governor George Wallace named a community college near Mobile after him, only to have the school change its name 4 years later. And in 1995 he was inducted into the Alabama Men's Hall of Fame, along with company he would never have imagined: Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, and Sequoyah. That concludes our biographical series on the turbulent life of William Lowndes Yancey. I think it shows that in many ways he was transformed by the realities of the new country he helped bring about, and one can only speculate on how he might have changed further had he lived longer. Be sure to check out the other episodes if you missed them, and let me know what you think in the comments. As always, there's additional context in the companion post on my website, and don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share with anyone who might be interested. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.